You have to know everything there is to know on a submarine. You can't just know my job. I've got to know your job and his job, everybody's job, because we depend so much on each other. This is my graduation class in 1955. That's me there, the third one in the back. I don't know if these are doing any good on your project or not, but and this is the trumpet fish. This is the submarine I served on. It's a World War II diesel submarine. We're pulling into Toronto, Italy, 1956. There's a couple more pictures of me when I was working on a boat. This I ran across today. This is just going to be some interesting reading for you once you get. This is a story about the USS Chopper, SS-342, on its final dive. It lost control and dove at an angle of over 80 degrees down angle. That's like straight to the bottom. They went 1,100 feet. Pulled it out at the end. But if you can imagine this room tilting up at 80 degrees, everything that's in it going every which way. This shows a good picture of, this is good to the second, everything that happened on that submarine at that time. Different angles of the boat. That's a pretty deep dive. When it surfaced equally as sharp and came up past the conning tower out of the water and went back down in. The submarine was stressed so much that it never dove again. They had to scuttle it. But save for an electrician who realized in the submarine we have a compartment called the maneuvering room where the electricians work. There's no depth pressure gauges. I mean, there's no depth gauges to tell you how many feet deep you are. But at 100 feet deep, you got 44 pounds a square inch of pressure. But in the maneuvering room, we had a pressure gauge. And then the maneuvering room, the pressure gauge went over about 150 pounds, which put them over 400 feet deep. In the maneuvering room, which is 312 feet past the bow of the boat, so they went down quite a bit. It was a bit. I'm glad I wasn't on that one, because they say you only have to, all submariners are volunteers, but that would have made me quit volunteering. I joined the Navy. I had a troubled childhood. I joined the Navy because I didn't have anything else to do. I wasn't going anywhere where I was. So I decided, well, I don't want to go in the Army. Didn't want to get drafted. They had to draft in those days. So I said, I'll volunteer and I'll join the Navy. when I got in the Navy, I went to submarine school. Well, I went to boot camp first, which was about 12 weeks. And after 12 weeks of boot camp, during boot camp they give you a series of tests, batteries of tests to see what you might be qualified to do. I seemed to have tested out to be an electrician. I didn't know that, but I was an electrician. So, fortunately, I got to go to Class A school, which is usually reserved for sailors that's already in the fleet. Then they go to the school. But I went right from boot camp into Class A school as an electrician, where they taught me motors and generators and motor controllers, everything there is to know about electricity. It was during that time I met a fellow, and we decided we were going to go to the submarines, put in for submarine duty. And we both were accepted. We went to sub school together, we went to boot camp together, we went to Class A electrician school together. Once we could, and we went to sub school, that's when you got weeded out. I mean, if you were going to be a submariner, that's the place to find out whether you're going to be able to make it or not, because it's really a strange way of living. Like I say, it's like living with 80 people in a 2-bedroom house. You got to be able to get along with people. You have to be able to confinement. If you had 120 guys in a class, entering a class, by the time you get halfway through, half of them are gone. And I think we only had 22 graduates in our class that finished up. So they're kind of a special group. Once you get through sub school, you go to the boat. And once you're assigned to a boat, that's when the real work starts, because that's when you have to qualify to get to dolphins. Dolphins are like an airman's wings. The nice thing about the dolphins is once you get them, they don't expire. They're there forever. To qualify, well, you the Navy sets you straight right from the get-go. I'm going to backtrack into boot camp, because once you go to boot camp, you go in there as a wise-ass kid that thinks they know everything, but once you set foot on the ground in boot camp, within 5 minutes you feel like you're so small you can sit on a cigarette paper and let your feet hang off. They really beat you down, and you don't feel like you're worth anything. Then they make you into what you should be. When you get on a submarine, you're still not a submariner. You're just on a submarine. You have to qualify, and you give you about a year to qualify on a submarine. And during that year's period, you have to go to what we call School of the Boat. All submarine sailors that are not qualified are affectionately called non-qualified pukes. Which, you don't want to keep that title too long, because you don't want it to stick. So if you're a non-qualified puke, once you stand your watch or do your duties, then you have what we call 4 hours of School of the Boat, where you have to go into one of the compartments, like the torpedo room, learn all about the torpedoes, learn the different systems, how they fire, how they flood the tubes, everything that goes on in that room. Once you figure out that you know that room inside and out, and know everything, how to do every job in there, you go to a qualified submariner, and he'll sign off your qualification card, like I gave you a copy of my card. Then you go on to the next task. If you're qualified, once you stand your watch, you can do anything you want. You can play cards, watch movies, Just hang out, do whatever you want to do. Sleep. Do a lot of sleeping on a submarine. But if you're not qualified, you're out of school on the boat. That goes for the officers too. Everybody has to go through an enlisted man that's qualified first. Once you get all the rooms and all of the systems, the lube oil systems, fuel oil systems, trim systems, air systems, and there's more than one air system. There's breathable air, there's 60-pound air, there's 6,000-pound air for blowing the ballast tanks, and so on and so forth. Once you get all that done, then you go through with your engineering officer. He'll take you through all the compartments. If he's satisfied that you know and you can make the, he might tell you to make a drawing of the freshwater system in that compartment, and you'd have to make a drawing of it, showing all the valves, whether they're open or closed, how the system works, how to get rid of the water, how to flood water in. When he's satisfied with you, then you go to the next step. That's with the captain and the executive officer. They'll carry you through the boat and they'll ask you questions. And they'll ask for drawings. If you get through them, then you're a qualified submariner. They'll pin the dolphins on you, and immediately you're grabbed and thrown overboard. It's a rite of passage, if you will. There's no group of people closer than submariners. Submariners will tell you not to take anything away from any other branch of the service, but it was said, how long would it take an average sailor to become a submariner? And the answer is never. An average sailor will never be a submariner. We don't feel better than anybody else, but we're just a cut above. Because we do things that it's very difficult taking everything you own and sticking it in a little compartment no bigger than this, because you don't have much room to put all your stuff. I used to put my uniform underneath my mattress. I'd lay it out, my uniform out like that under the mattress, put the mattress on. That way it would press my clothes while I slept. I don't recall to this day where I kept most of my stuff on board a submarine. There's room for everything but a mistake. There's no room for a mistake on a submarine. And you depend on everybody. I depend on you. My life depends on what you do. And your life depends on what I do. And that's a brotherhood that, to this day, where I first met you, I served with another fellow that was there on the same boat at the same time. So 60 years, we're still friends. We still work together, still see each other. So they're a special group of people. What else can I tell you?
What are some of your most memorable experiences while being on a submarine?
Well, I've had a couple of times when water came in that wasn't supposed to come in, where the valve didn't close all the way. We took on a lot of water. The maneuvering room is right next to the torpedo room, the after torpedo room. And I remember one time water coming in through the air vent, and I grabbed a tarp that covered the torpedo, and we made a tunnel of it, funneled the water down into the pump room, which was below the walking deck where we were. We got the water stopped. I don't know how, I can't recall how much water we took on, but we lost control of the dive for a little while, but nothing like the chopper. Most of my experiences were pretty good. I would never change anything I did on submarine. I mean, I've made mistakes on submarines, but I learned real quick. I had one time that we had a ground in one of the motors, and to clear the ground, we poured 55 gallons of carbon tetrachloride, which is a cleaning solvent, into the motor housing to try to get rid of the ground. And I remember we had what's called red devil blowers. They were just circulating the air so you didn't get toxic fumes in you. Well, we had more toxic fumes than we had air blowing. And I passed out. And an officer had seen me pass out and grabbed me and took me up the hatch. Otherwise, I might not have made that. I've come closer to dying more on volcanoes than I have on a submarine. But they say any time a submarine goes down, as long as it comes back up, it's all right. If I'm going to go to sea, I'd rather go to sea on a boat that'll both float and sink and still be all right. There was one. I'm trying to think of another thing. Nothing that's. We had a captain that liked to do what they called an airless surface, airless start, which was a little scary. We had a 4-battery boat. Each battery consisted of 126 cells. Each cell is 2 volts and was about the size of a refrigerator. So it takes up a lot of room. And what they would do, in case your propulsion unit, main propulsion unit on the surface is on a diesel engine. To start a diesel engine, you need air. You need air for a diesel to run. So say, for instance, you lose your air, where you can't blow the tanks or you can't surface. You pump out what water you can pump out to give you buoyancy, and you switch the batteries from parallel into series, which doubles the voltage. And you get the motors, you wind it, it's kind of like putting it in first gear to go as fast as you can and shift it into second and get it going as fast as you can. You kind of liken the system to in the old days when you couldn't start your car. You had to push start it, you jump in the car, and step on the clutch and release it to get the engine to kick over. Well, that's what you're doing with a submarine. You get it going as fast as you can possibly get it going, and you just barely broach the surface, and as soon as you do, you pull all of it off of the battery, switch the generators to the battery bus, motorize the generator, which is just like kick-starting the engine, start the engine and go. But boy, when it does that, it throws a big arc of electricity around the room like you wouldn't believe. But other than that, I haven't had too many mishaps on submarines. Can't afford any. Ask away, Sam, I'm all yours.
Where did you serve? Like, where did the submarine go when you were serving on it?
Well, that's a good question. I was stationed when I got out of New London, Connecticut, I went to sub school in New London, Connecticut. When I got out of there, I was asked where I wanted to go. I had a choice of Norfolk, Virginia, New London, Connecticut, Key West, Florida, or San Diego. Well, my buddy that I served with all that time before that, he decided he wanted to go to San Diego, but I didn't want to go back to California. And I damn sure didn't want to stay up north. So I said, well, I lived in Miami, I might as well try to get to Key West. Got lucky enough to get to Key West, so I went to Squadron 4 in Key West and was assigned to the Trumpet Fish. the trumpet fish did what they call daily ops. Up in the morning at 6 o'clock, you put to sea, and you have anti-submarine warfare. The trumpet fish that I served on was an attack submarine, which primary duty was to seek out and destroy enemy submarines. So we'd go out, we'd play war games, if you will, where one submarine would attack another submarine. Or we'd try to attack a ship undetected. I remember one of the operations we had where they put a boat in a 40-mile square area, and we had to sail for, that was in the Aleutian Islands off of Florida. We left Key West, and our job was to enter that 40 square miles area, find that ship and sink it without it detecting us. Of course, when we sink it by surfacing and firing a flare at them, saying, "Okay, we got you, you're dead." And we did it. We had special gear we were testing at the time. I don't know how confidential or classified it is, so suffice to say it seemed to have worked. But then we have operations where we would change the propellers on the submarine, put on old beat-up propellers, primarily because they were likely to get damaged some more. And in the beginning, in World War II, we used Mark 14 steam torpedoes. They were 21-inch torpedoes that were operated on steam. They developed a new one called an acoustic torpedo, which listened and honed in on sound. So we would fire our torpedoes at each other on these exercises out of Key West, where we'd fire these cutie fish, we call them cuties for acoustic. We'd fire a cutie fish at another submarine, and if it hit the screws, of course it would damage the screw a little bit, and have to change the propellers again. If it hit the side of the sub, it wouldn't cause any serious damage because the hull is so thick, and we didn't have any warhead on it, so that we were lucky. But I remember we had an electrician's mate who served in World War II and had gone through some real depth charges during the war. And when they dropped these, they also have exercises where they would drop small depth charges just to make a noise and let you know that you were hit or you weren't hit. And you could hear them cans sometimes hitting on the deck and rolling down the deck. And before they'd explode, they'd click twice. And they'd hear that click, click. The electrician's mate's coffee would just splash out of it. He would just shake so bad. I have all the respect in the world for some of those guys that went to sea on a submarine in World War II and went through some of the action that they went through. I've been scared a lot, but I've never been terrified like they must have been. So, other than that, can't think of anything that scared me anymore than that. I had one fella got his hand caught in a knife, what they call a knife switch. So he had to switch the switch on when we were doing a surface airless start exercise. Got his hand caught in there, and the electricity went through his arm and through his body and threw him out into the passageway. And the torpedo man from the back came running in and saved him with CPR. But by and large, we were pretty good. We had a good crew, good operations. We made a lot of trips. We made trips to all over the Caribbean, Haiti, Jamaica, Guantanamo Bay, Santiago, Cuba, Kingston, Jamaica, all the Caribbean islands. Went to I served in Paris, not Paris, but Brest and Le Havre, France, Scotland, Ireland, Spain, Mallorca, Italy, Greece. There's got to be more than that, but I had a pretty good tour. They wanted me. I went on one nuclear submarine in Seawolf for 2 weeks to try to see if I liked it, so I could ship over to go to nuclear power school. I didn't like the new submarines, the nuclear powered submarines. They were too, excuse me, especially they were just too big. They had air conditioning. They had better compartments to sleep in. My compartment on the Trumpet Fish was actually on top of a torpedo. I had a torpedo underneath me, a big motor that drove the stern planes on the side of me and a bulkhead on the other side of me. I couldn't get tossed out of bed during the worst storm, but it was a good place to sleep because at night it would kind of just rock you to sleep. But I decided not to ship over, so I got out, and then I did a 4-year hitch in an inactive reserve. So I served a total of 8 years. But it's 8 years I'd never change. I wouldn't change it for anything. It was just an experience that made a man out of me, gave me a trade, gave me something to do when I got out. And I participated. Yesterday I was with the Veterans Memorial. I go to as many events as I can at the Veterans Memorial, and I get choked up every time I go. It's good to see you doing what you're doing. What you're doing is like getting qualified. I know it's not easy. So congratulations to you.
Thank you.
What else you got?
Well, I'm just gonna have to start the intro card because we've just started early. So today is Sunday, March 25th, 2017, and this is the middle of an interview with
Tippy
Dioria at his home in Ocala, Florida. My name is Sam Kukoski, and I am the interviewer. Could you please tell us your full name and address?
Matthew. Not many people know me by Matthew, but it's Matthew Tippy Dioria.
Where were you born?
I was actually born in Nyack, New York, on September 10th, 1935. But I moved down to Florida when I was only 1 year old, so I consider Florida my home.
How old are you today?
Today, same age I was yesterday, 81.
Who are your parents, and what did they do?
My father was a carpenter. My mother was a secretary. Both of deceased. They both died in 1991. They were divorced when I was 9 years old, and when I was 13 years old, I left home. I ran away. I joined a carnival, and I just kind of scraped by. I was kind of like on the streets, and fished for a living for a little while in the early 50s. And that's when I realized that I was going nowhere on a fast train, and decided to join the military and learn a trade or do something with my life, which was a smart move. I learned very young. I had to grow up, if you will. I had to grow up at a very young age. I didn't have a childhood. I don't recall having a childhood at all. It was survive. But I made it. I did good. I ended up leaving my mark. I'm fortunate enough that through my hobby of astronomy, I've helped enough people over the last 30, 40 years that I had an asteroid named after me. I started a convention that's lasted for 30 years. It hosts 600 astronomers every year. And I've got an observatory named after me. So I must have done something right.
Did you have any siblings?
Yes, I've got a sister who lives in Flemington, New Jersey. She is, I guess, about 78 or 79 now. Not positive. She's 2.5 years younger than I am. And that's the only one I have. I have just my sister. I have 3 children of my own. I have a son was born in 1959. I've got a daughter born in 1961 and a daughter born in 1963. So I've got a granddaughter that she's just turned 20, I think. So yeah, that's about it.
What was your rank?
I was electrician's mate, third class petty officer.
Why did you choose the Navy?
Because I didn't want to go in the Army. I didn't want to be drafted, and I lived in Miami almost all my life at that time still. I had been fishing, like I said, I fished for a living. I'm used to the water. I was used to boats. I liked the sea. I figured the Navy was the place to be. That was my best choice. It also offered me a chance to get a better education. I figured if I joined in that was during the Korean War, so if I joined the Korean War, I wasn't going to go to school. I was going to go right overseas into an area I didn't want to go there. I wasn't that patriotic. So I chose the Navy.
Did you receive any other special training besides like what you had to work on a submarine?
Well, actually, I had. It wasn't really special training, but I did get training when I got out of sub school. I remember I had put in for submarine electrician school, which was another school, special school just for batteries. It only lasted a couple of weeks. And then I went to motion picture projection school to learn how to operate and show movies and splice film and such, because that was the electrician's job on board ship, was to show the movies. He was in charge of them. So I got to see all the movies. And when you put to sea, if you were going to sea for any length of time, you would take maybe a dozen movies with you. And once you got seeing all those movies, you didn't have any other movies to see. So as you go into a port, when you pull into a port, first thing the electrician grabs up those movies and he goes to another ship. What do you got? This is what I got. Swap movies. Come back, you get a new stack of movies. So we'd be swapping movies all the time we were overseas. Because like the trip I told you, those when I was going to Ireland and Scotland and France, that was what we called a med trip, Mediterranean trip. We have submarines always going to the Mediterranean and operating out of the Mediterranean. We go over there, we relieve a submarine for a while. He'll come back to the States for a while. We'll take his place. We've got them all over.
Do you recall your instructors?
Not really. At 81, I barely got my own name. But I remember all of my shipmates were instructors, because I learned something from every one of them. What I couldn't tell you, but I was thinking about that the other day. I was wondering if I could try to recall my drill instructor when I was in boot camp, 1954. He was one tough son of a gun, and he would, for the lack of a better expression, like to put a boot up your ass every chance he could, because you'd be marching, you get out of step one time and you'd know it, you could feel it. He'd kick you in the butt. He demeaned you every chance he got. And you hated him for it. I mean, if you got caught with a cigarette in your pocket, that would be your lunch. And he was that kind of a guy. But at the end of that 16 weeks, he was somebody you were proud to know. Because when you go in, you go in with one attitude, but when you come out with an old new attitude that you wouldn't recognize yourself 16 weeks ago. But I couldn't remember his name to save my life. I remember he was a first-class boatswain's mate. We didn't have boatswain's mates on submarines. We had boatswain's mates on ships, but not on the boats.
How did you adapt to submarine life?
Well, you don't really get a chance to adapt. You get there, they say, this is your bunk. You have what they call a ditty bag that hangs off the side of your bunk, and inside that is all your toiletries and everything goes in there. Zip up, you start your gear away. You stand a 4-hour watch. The interesting about it, let's say I have the 8 to 12 watch. That's 8 in the morning till noon, and 8 at night till midnight. The rest of the time, I'm either school of the boat as a non-qualified puke, or if I'm qualified, I can just play cards, read, whatever I feel like doing. I lost my train of thought. That happens a lot. What were we?
It was, how did you adapt to submarine life? And you were saying
Oh.
you don't adapt, you don't really.
Yeah, where I was going was you don't really know what. Once you get to sea, there's no looking out to sea. You know, you're in a submarine, you're in a tube, and you don't see anything but what's inside. So if they wake me up for watch to go stand my watch, and if I've got the 8 to 12 watch, I don't know. After about 3 or 4 days at sea, you don't know what time it is. In those days, we didn't have digital watches, by the way. They were all analog watches. But you didn't know what time it was. You didn't know if it was 8 o'clock in the morning or 8 o'clock at night. You just knew it was 8 o'clock. You wouldn't know whether it was daytime or nighttime until you went to the mess hall to eat your meal. If you had eggs, it was morning. If you had mashed potatoes or steak or something, it would be the evening meal. Usually you tell by what meal you're eating what time of the day it is. The only people that got to go topside or go up on the bridge were seamen. They would be, part of their duty was lookout watches, so they'd be standing up in the conning tower as lookouts. Electricians' mates never got to go up topside. Except that's how I got excuse me. that's how I got involved in astronomy, actually, was while serving in the North Atlantic. The quartermaster came to me one night and he said, I got to go up topside to shoot stars to get a position. What he meant by shooting stars is using a sextant at night on the stars so you could determine where we were. And he said, I need somebody to log down some notes. You want to help me? And I said, I jumped at the chance. I'd love to go topside and get a breath of fresh air or see something. So he asked the old man if it was all right if he went up with him, and the captain gave me permission to go up. So I remember going through the hatch, and when I got through the hatch and I looked up, I instinctively ducked my head because I felt like I was going to bump my head on the sky. It was so many stars, and it was inky black, jet black. In the middle of the North Atlantic, there's no lights at all, ever, anywhere. And that night, I remember the quartermaster taught me Polaris, Arcturus, and a couple of other navigational stars. That was my first exposure to astronomy. It wasn't until, but that was just an exposure to it. It didn't hook me yet. It wasn't until 26 years later, after I got out of the Navy, a young fellow, about your age, came to my house one night with a little telescope. And he set it up in the backyard and he pointed to a bright star and he said, you see that star up there? And I said, yeah. He said, well, that's not a star, that's a planet. That's Saturn. And I said, oh, sure. Gotcha, man. Because I figured he was just joking with me. So I said, well, here, take a look. And he puts it on there. And I looked in there, and there's Saturn. You can see the rings around Saturn just as plain as day. And I turned around and looked in front of it. I was almost expecting to see a little drawing hanging in front of the telescope. Now, mind you, for me to see that, it had to be dark. But before I went to bed that night, I owned a telescope just like it. My wife and I got hooked that quick that we went out and bought a telescope just like it, which was something that I never would have done again because it was the wrong kind of telescope to buy. And it took me a while to figure out what kind of telescope that I really wanted. But that was my introduction to astronomy. We joined the Southern Cross Astronomical Society then, and from there, the astronomy thing just zoomed. I've lectured all over, from Guatemala south to Costa Rica, Canada, all over the United States, universities, high schools, civics groups, clubs, and did what we call astronomy outreach, tried to get the youngsters involved in it. Like, I wish somebody had shown me Saturn when I was that age instead of when I was 30. What else you got for me, Sam?
What kind of work did you do with volcanoes?
Good question. With the volcanoes, I have a friend of mine. His name is Stephen O'Meara. Stephen has got excellent eyes and his eyesight was extraordinary. He recovered visually Halley's Comet on its last return to Earth from 14,000 feet at Mauna Kea Observatory in Hawaii, breathing nothing but oxygen, pure oxygen. And he visually recovered it. He was the first one to see it on his 76-year return trip. So he was into volcanoes as well. And he asked me one time, he says, I'm going down to Costa Rica to check out a volcano that's been erupting. He says, "You want to go with me?" And I said, "Sure, I'd love to go." As it turned out, I've got, and I'll show you when we leave, in the room there, I've got a Parade magazine cover with a photograph of one of my eruptions. We were there, and all of a sudden we had this horrendous eruption happen. It lasted 20 minutes with strombolian ash and rock flying up 700 meters up into the air, lasting 20 minutes long. And when it was all over, we happened to look up, and there's this big, bright, full moon. And we got to thinking about that, and we thought, as astronomers, if the moon can have a tidal effect on the oceans, on tides, could it not have an effect on magma chambers in a volcano? So we went on a 10-year quest of going to every volcano that we could that was erupting, recording the moon's position and phase to see if we could predict when the volcano would erupt. Came close on several occasions. On one trip in 1991, we estimated that the volcano would erupt at 11:30. And we were telling all the tourists in town, watch the volcano Friday night at 11:30, it's going to erupt. And damn it if it didn't erupt 5 minutes later than we had predicted. So we got through it. We got to thinking that was pretty cool. We thought we were really onto something. But then in 2001, I led a National Geographic expedition to the volcanoes of Costa Rica and Guatemala, and Steve led the same geographic program, took him to Stromboli in Italy. Italy was acting up pretty good, and R&R wasn't, so our track record wasn't what we thought it was going to be, but it was an interesting experience. We got to see a lot of, I've photographed over 160 erupting volcanoes, so that I've added to my 81 years. I've led quite a full life. I've got no complaints. I wish I was in better health, but I got no complaints other than that.
What else have you done since serving in the military?
Well, when I got out of the military, I went to being an electrician in the military, which gave me a little edge. I became an electrical apprentice in house wiring and such. Became an electrician. I worked as an electrician from 1958 until about 1961. And interesting thing happened to me then was in 1960, the construction business just fell out. It just dropped out of nowhere. Nobody was making any money. The only thing that was going good was in Miami was the Miami Beach Convention Center. They were working double shifts there to keep up with the work, but I was in the union, and if you wasn't good with the union, you didn't get out on a job. So I didn't have no work. I just had, my daughter was just born. My son was already born. Matter of fact, I had 2 kids already. No job. I remember I had my first house, I paid $14,500 for it. 3-bedroom house. My payments were $89 a month, and I lost the house because I couldn't keep the payments. I ended up going to New York, where my dad lived, and where I was originally born. And that winter, I never saw snow before. That winter, I drove a diaper truck for a diaper service, delivering diapers to houses for the newborn mothers who didn't have to do diapers. Who didn't have disposable diapers in those days. And I remember being a southern boy, I had on gabardine slacks and short shirt and a jacket. That was it. I was freezing my tail off, and the windshield wiper wasn't working on the truck. It was one of those trucks where you almost had to stand up to drive it. And I'm leaning forward trying to wipe the windshield off so I could see the snow see the road. And a semi-tractor came by, flying by, and threw slush all over me. I was cold and wet. I had a whole load still of diapers to be delivered. Normally I finished at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and it was already dark. And I wasn't even halfway through. And I said, to hell with this. And I turned the truck around, I took it back to Nyack, and I said, I can't get through, I can't see the road. So I said, we'll put it on get the load on another truck and get you out of here right away. And I said, no, you don't understand. I ain't going out right away. I'm not going out no more ever. I quit. Came back to Miami. And I went to work as a scab electrician, broke because the union didn't want no part of me then because I worked as a scab. But at least I was working. I had babies to feed. Then I went to work. Then I went hopscotch back fishing for a living, doing little odd jobs on the street, carnival and such. Once I got out of the Navy, I went to work as a car mechanic for Miami Lincoln Mercury for 8.5 years. Then after that, I went to work I put in an application to go to Eastern Airlines. So in 1968, after 8 years with Lincoln Mercury, I went to work for the airlines. I worked for Eastern Airlines for 23 years. And they went bankrupt. And here I am again. I was, at that time, about 56 years old. I said, to hell with it, I'll just retire. I've got 23 years with the company, no problem. Well, as it turned out, the company had not paid into management's retirement for a couple of years trying to save the company from bankruptcy, and I didn't have enough time to retire. I needed 21 years in the plan, and I had 20 years, 9 months. I was 3 months short. And they wouldn't do anything to help me to make that bridge for that. So my wife and I were expecting a long strike. And I said, well, the hell with it. We've got a few dollars in the bank. I'm going to go back to school. So I went back to Miami-Dade College. I ended up getting an associate degree in computer integrated manufacturing, and I got another degree in electronic engineering. I ended up going to school, worked for the school for 13 years teaching until I was 71, and then I retired, came up here in 2006. We moved up here in Ocala. So that's my job history from day one to now. Now I don't do anything. It's not that I'm lazy. I just don't like doing anything.
Is there anything I forgot to ask you about your military?
I doubt it. You covered it pretty well. How many more projects do you have to go to?
Just a few. I only have a few left. Have you remained in contact or reunited with any fellow veterans?
Oh yes. I meet with one that I served with on Fish. Every month I see him. I had the fellow that I went to boot camp with and sub school with. Unfortunately, he passed away, but the last time I saw him, he was totally blind. He was in an automobile accident and was blinded. And that was sad, but as far as anybody else, no, just I've gone to 2 reunions of ships reunions, but myself and just a couple others served at the same time. Most of them are gone now. Because when I was on the Trumfish, I was only 21. It's kind of odd to think that you take a vessel as complex as a submarine and you turn it over and it's all operated by a bunch of 21-year-olds. It's really amazing. It's amazing when you stop and think about it. Especially if you see some of them trying to drive a car now.
What are some life lessons you learned in the military?
Wow. Never volunteer for anything. I can't think of any life lessons. I know that I have a strong feeling about trustworthiness and such, because on board that submarine I could take my wallet or $50 worth of cash and throw it up on my bunk and go stand my watch, then eat a meal and play cards for a little while and go back to bed. There wouldn't be 10 cents missing. Two things I'm proud to say that we never had on board that submarine. I'm not saying it doesn't happen on all submarines. I'm saying on that submarine, at that time frame, we never had a theft and we never had a drug problem. I smoked then. I smoked cigarettes and I smoked cigars then. But something I wish I hadn't have done. But other than that, not much.
What lessons would you pass on to today's generation?
If you'd like to do it, do it. If you don't think you can do it anyway. Because what you don't think you can do, you'd be surprised what you can do when you really try. Even if you think you can't do it, you can do it. Who made your cards up?
I mean, I got them off of the Library of Congress, but my mom actually made them. I made the cards. I got the questions from the Library of Congress, though.
Good questions.
What kind of friendships did you form while serving?
All good. I can't think of a bad friendship I had. I got along with let's say Liberty. Liberty is when you go out off of the base or off of there was a lot of them that I probably would not go on Liberty with because I was drinking at that time and partying and a lot of them didn't drink or party, so I didn't associate too much with them in that respect. But if you drank or partied, I was your man. There was something else I was going to say, and I lost it again. It'll pop back.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell me about?
I never confessed to anything.
All right, then that's all the questions I have for you.
I hope I was some help for you.
You were. Great interview. Thank you.